Good evening and welcome to another Stormgate Editor showcase video, this time showcasing various Autocast spells. This will feature the classic spell, Net Throw, which will immobilize a target with smart targeting to avoid overcasting the spell redundantly on the same target. Seismic Slam, which will deal damage around the caster, but only will autocast when 5 or more targets around the caster. Recharge, which will power down the unit briefly when it runs out of energy and come online again when it has recharged its energy. And lastly, Retreat Teleport, which will make the unit automatically teleport away from the enemy when something gets too close to the unit. As always, if you have something you want me to see made in editor for your own use or just because you want to see it in editor, then feel free to say so in the comment section. Now, first spell of the video, Net Throw. This is a classic spell in both RTS and video games in general. The idea being to create an in order to cast a spell that immobilizes the target. First thing first, I will set up the buff aspect, and I will have an applied tags here, which I will set to status immobilized. Now this does not actually immobilize the target, at the very least not to my understanding as far as I tested it. The purpose of this tag, I believe, is for dispel effects in order to remove immobilization buffs, to my understanding. But I will be eliminating the movement from the units with the modifier here. Now I'll go to buff visual. A buff visual here. What this will do is this is a graphical effect that will be displayed on the unit that has the buff so long as the buff remains on the target. And I'll set the buff's duration to last 10 seconds, so it remains immobilized for 10 seconds. And the icon here, when the unit receives the debuff and you select it, this is the icon that will be displayed in the command card when you see the debuff. And now for the modifiers. I'll set this to speed unscaled bonus and setting this to -999. This reducing the movement by this much will effectively mean that there is no way to increase the value up again to the point where the unit can ever move again, so long as for the duration of the spell, for the duration of the buff at the very least. And let's see here, height. I wanted to be fancy, and seeing as this was supposed to be an immobilization net throw ability, I wanted to lower the vertical height of air units to ground targets and make them ground targets. But currently when I try to adjust any of these 4 values, then the editor program force closes. I've reported this to the developers and they will hopefully fix this at some point. And next up, the apply buff. This is the most common game effect you'll be using for weapons and abilities in order to apply buffs onto the units. And I'll be using the previously created buff here. This is the parameter which will be indicating what type of buff will be applied. And the target is indeed target. And the impact effects. This will be a small graphical effect when the apply effect is first launched onto the unit, then this will apply and swarm the graphical effects onto the unit. Now for launch projectile. This will be, give a moment. If you want to launch a projectile towards a target, then you will be using the launch projectile here. If you wanted to instantly go into the target, such as is the case with many spells, then you will be skipping this step. And first thing first, flag. Marked exclusive. What this means is that, well, this will need both the launch projectile and this will have to be enabled on both the launch projectile and for the staged ability to be true. When you launch a unit with marked exclusive target on both launch projectile and stage ability, then so long as the projectile is in transit, then other units will not try to autocast the same ability onto the same target. If there are other units in the vicinity, then, for instance, if there are other units in the vicinity, then two separate spellcasters will cast on two separate targets, but with marked targets, so long as the projectile is in transit, then it will impede the autocasting of another spell before it impacts. And now impact effect. This will be the apply buff, so that once the projectile lands onto the target, it will apply the impact effect here, which is the apply buff. And impact location, so will be the target, and I will set this to entity. The difference between point and entity here is that the entity, it will be tracking the unit. If I cast a spell and the unit starts moving, then the spell will be tracking the target. But if I had this set to point, then a unit will launch the ability and the ability will fly towards where the unit was standing when you launched the ability or the weapon. But I will be setting this to entity, yes. So it will be tracking the target. And the launch location, this will be from the caster itself. And the movement speed will be, I'll set this to 30. This determines how fast the projectile will be traveling towards the target. And projectile. This is the model for the projectile itself, what it will be looking like. If you do not have a model, then this will not have an invisible projectile flying towards the target. It will simply instantly travel at the target. And I'll be setting this to... I could not find anything that was reminiscent about a net spell in the game currently, at very least not as far as I found. And there is no view model stuff to see what it looks like, so I simply had to test a couple of to see what was what. And now for the validator. What a validator is that this is for all intents and purposes. This is a logic pattern you can create in order to prevent the spell from being casted onto a target, or if there are certain patterns are not true. For this validator, I will be making sure that the autocast will only be able to cast the spell onto targets if they do not have the core buffer. In order for this to work, I set the function call to logic and with an equal to parameter in order to set this to false, in order to make sure that this is only true if the target does not have the respective buffer. Starting off with a core question, if the target has a buff from source, the target being the what you're trying to use the spell at, the spell is trying to use the launch projectile towards. And the buff being the buff in the throw net, the hell, and the source hell. I will be setting this to any unit. This is for all intents and purposes an alternative thing. I could set this to target. What this means is that if the target if the target had casted a buff onto itself, then I would not be able to cast the spell, or if the caster had casted a spell onto the target, then I would not be able to. But the caster would not be able to cast it again. But others would be able to, seeing as they were not the caster of the buff. So that is why I'm setting this to any unit. This will usually be the default thing you set, so that it does not care who that casted the buff. So long as it has the buff, then the validator will be true. I'll be setting this to any. And again, I'm setting this to false though. By default, if you had set a function call here, then you will not be able to throw. If you had the function call up here without the false option, then you would only be able to cast it on the buffs units that already had a buff. So that's why I'm the logic in setting this to false. And now for the button quickly. In the command card where you see the abilities, then this button will be dictating what it will look like. And here you will be able to set the name of the ability or the tooltip. But currently you're unable to store this for a long time. If you set this something here and you restart the program, then you will get a missing string error message again here. You will have to open the CSV file, which I do not currently have on software for. So do not bother putting too much effort into this in the PTR. And for the staged ability, unstaged ability, what's it? Staged ability. This is what most spells in the game will be. This is how you will be assembling most spells in the game with. And first thing first, an autocast. I'll be setting autocast to remove ally player and self. This means that when the unit is looking for a target, it will not autocast onto your friendly units. And enabling autocast in itself, this will mean that the spell has an autocast alternative and initially on. This means that when the unit is created, it will have a glowing circular effect, which means that it will automatically be casted. In contrast with the Stegadon here, the Magmadon here for instance, which has a trample that has an autocast alternative but is not enabled by default. And exclusive targeting here. This is what I mentioned previously with mark exclusive target. Now this in the ability itself, this is not. What this will do is that will also, if I had a casting time for the spell, then and I set the casting time to 2 seconds, then during the 2 seconds that the unit will be casting the spell at target, then other units will not autocast onto the target. If I have exclusive targeting on. But once this has casted its abilities, one of the others will be able to cast it afterwards. And next up, the range of autocast. And I'll set this here to better explain this. Maximum range. This will dictate how close the unit will have to go to the target in order to cast the spell. I believe, however, if the range here is greater than the maximum range, then the unit will go closer to the target in order to be able to cast the target. And if it is lower than the maximum then you can cast it manually, but it will not autocast if it is not within the autocast range. And the target sort here. If you do not have a target sort for autocasting, and I hypothetically could cast it onto friendly units, then by default, without any target sort filter, then the unit will be going from the bottom left to and target there and look for targets upwards to the upper right corner. So also, if I did not have exclusive targeting or target sort, then all of these units would be casting their spell at this unit here, seeing as it is in the bottom left corner. But I will be setting this to distance closest, so that they will throw the net spell at the closest target. And validator here. Net throw. So this means that I will be able, if I give me a moment. The cast game effect. This will be what when you cast ability. This is what the ability will use, which is in this case will be the launch projectile, and the direct connection to the cast ability itself. If I had used the validator here, then I will not be able to cast the spell onto targets that had the immobilization buff here. Since the direct connection here, the validator and the direct connection here effectively operates as the spell's validator to determine if you can cast it or not. But in the autocast here, this will be if this is not true, then you can still manually cast the spell, but the spell unit will not automatically cast the spell. So if the target has the immobilization debuff, then even if all of these could cast the spell, then they will not automatically do so. And if I had it onto the launch projectile here, then I would not be able to even manually cast it onto the unit if it already had an immobilization debuff. And for the command cell, this will primarily be used for adding a cooldown onto the spell, but you can also have charges here. For instance, I have 3 charges of the spell, and I get a new charge every second, and this spell has a 1 second cooldown. I will be able to cast this spell 3 consecutive times quickly with a 1 second period between them, and it will get a new charge every 8 seconds. But for this spell, I will only have a 5 second cooldown on the spell. And for the preempt here, also the best unit here, and the best unit here. If this is enabled, then only one caster will be casting the spell on the target. If this hypothetically was disabled, then and I manually casted it, then all of the selected units that I had would be throwing their spell at the target. But that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for preempt. What this means is that without preempt, if I was attack moving in this direction, for instance, and I casted this without preempt, then once I casted the spell, then the unit would cancel all of its other orders. But with preempt enabled, it will once it casted its spell, it will keep going and performing its the previous orders. That is what preempt will do. And let's see. And the targeting filters here. If I had with all of these enabled, then I can cast the spell on any unit. So I could, for instance, be able to cast this onto my own units as well. Even if the autocast can only attack it onto the target enemies. Also, I can use tags here to, for instance, exclude. This will exclude the structures so that you do not waste the spell on the structures that cannot move, for instance. This is you can use tags to exclude certain unit types. And the targeting type here, I'll be setting this to unit. The difference between unit and location here is that if I can with a location I could target anywhere and I would cast the spell. Since this is an direct launch projectile with no area of effect, then it would be wasted targeting on the ground. But if I had an area of effect spell, if I had a search radius spell, then I could cast it on the ground and this would be searching for targets around the ground here. But with the unit here, this means that in order for me to cast the spell, I will have the target and unit. Targeting the ground will give me an error message. And if I had both location or unit, then if for instance I had an area of effect spell, and I used it on the unit and it was outside of my range, then the caster would approach the unit and cast it at the location where the unit was standing. Cast it at the unit standing once it gets within the maximum range. And now I think this is everything. Yeah, I believe this is everything. And usually this unread component here, this is usually what you want to be using to have a caster animation on the unit. But I've been unable to find anything that gave any sort of animation to the gaunt here. So I would just have to effectively leave this empty. And I want to showcase how you give a unit an ability. In the ability list and command list here you will be seeing, here are the existing abilities of a unit, and here you can see the fresh new one. Now the unit has the ability to cast a spell, but I also want to see it in the command card so I can manually cast it or disable Autocast, for instance. Now in the command card, I have set the ability, and I'll setting the button. This will be the icon ability name and tooltip for the ability. And here is where you determine where in the command card it is placed. The slot here, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the horizontal way, so that the number 1, this is the furthest to the left, and number 5, this is the furthest to the right. For the row here, the row 2 will be the default abilities: move, attack, stop, and patrol. These are the uppercase row number 2, and row number 1. This will be the bottom row, and I'll be setting this to the. So this will be the bottom row in the middle of. This will be the bottom row in the middle of everything. That is how you set up and give a unit and spell. Now let's test it out. And here now you can see I have the Autocast ability in the corner here, and here I have one target. Now let's try get closer. as you can see, it automatically casts ability, but only one of them will be casting it so long as it has the debuff. And so long as the unit has the debuff, thanks to the validator, it will not cast it again, but I can still manually cast it as much as I want. Now here I have a whole load of other targets. Now let's try and see how they work. As you can see, they each of them targeted their own respect. They're targeting each of their. They're targeting. They are casting it at the separate targets, and they will not be able to cast it onto targets that already has the debuff. That will hopefully give you an insight into what is at the very least a brief insight into what autocasting looks like. Now let's go on to the next unit, next spell. Next up we have Seismic Slam. This will be a somewhat simple ability, in that it will deal damage around the caster to enemies, and the autocast will go off if there are 5 or more enemies around the caster. First thing first, on damage radius. This will be combining a damage and a search radius. I'll be dealing damage value of 25 in an area of a radius for 6 around the caster, and a damage friction of 1. For this, with a fancy thing about damage radius here is that I could create multiple parameters here to, for instance, at a radius of 10 I only deal half the damage, and at 15 I only deal a quarter of the damage. This is a fancy thing you can do with damage radius easily, but I just want to deal in a small area around the caster. And location impact effects. What this will do is that it will create a particle effect in the area where at the center of the damage radius, where this will impact. Where is it? The damage impact effects. This will have a particle effect on all the targets that are eligible in the search filter here. On each of the targets will have an visual effect on applied to them, but I will just use it in the center of the caster. Seismic Slam and search filter. I will exclude the friendlies. Only enemies will be damaged by it, and the location will be the caster, so that when the damage radius is used, then it will always be in the center of the caster. And now for the button, I'll be using a Seismic Slam. I do not bother with naming and tooltip. And now to assemble the stage stability. I only need Autocast, having it initially on, and having a validator. This here will be used to in order to make sure that the autocast will only go off so long as there are 5 enemies surrounding the caster itself. And I'm setting the game effect to Seismic Slam, the damage radius. This is what will be used when you use the ability, and having a 4-second cooldown. And where is it? Target actor, yes. With the previously when I used a net throw, I had to manually click on the target I want to cast the spell on. But for this case I want to use instant target actor. What this will do is that the moment I click in the interface on the ability or with the respective hotkey, then this will immediately activate the ability, and the damage radius will be dealing damage around the caster. And also, just don't forget it, I will add preempt into the mix here in order to not have the unit freeze up every time it is used. And now for the real headache of the spell, making sure that only 5 enemies are making sure that this is only autocasted when 5 enemies are around it. For this, again, I will be using a logic, but I will be using a greater or equal than, meaning that when there are 5 or more enemies, then this validator will be true. And the only way so far I have found is to using count the entities in an area that passes the validator. The area being the caster that's trying to cast the spell, and on a distance of radius 6 around the caster. And I'll be using a combinator to make sure that the entities are both the enemies both alive and they are enemies. I'll check quickly with the combinator. All validators are met. This means that I can have, this will be necessitating that there will be I will have 2 validators be true instead of using a logic and using a multiple logic and parameters to create a difficult to read validator. I will instead making sure that the units are passing with these 2 combined here. This one is it's a somewhat simple one. The target is alive, and entity is treated as enemy. There is also unit treat others as enemy, but I had trouble with making this work, so I used the entity instead. I'm using this to target and caster. If I did this the other way, then the count enemies here would be only give me a moment. If I had the unit is enemy reversed here, then the counting the number of enemies would be counting the number of casters that treats the number of casters that treats targets as enemies. So that is why I did it this way, so that there are 6 targets that treats the caster of the spell as an enemy. And now to quickly apply this to an unit, and we will test it. And I had already set it up by looks of it before when testing. Okay, now let's check it out. And something before we continue. There, you will notice here that there are multiple bruiser entities here. If I have multiple entities with the same target, then it will be difficult to figure out which one is it that I applied the ability to. Or weapon, for instance. So, my somewhat easy solution is to go through the entity properties here and see who has what abilities. This one does not have the ability I was created. Neither does this one. It does not have anything special. And this one right here. This one has the unique ability that I was looking for. So that is one way to look through name if you have multiple units with the same name in the editor. And now we have it. Now I have a spell which I can cast manually, and up here I will have 4 enemies, and in this direction I will have 5 enemies. Now we'll be demonstrating. As you can see, it does not cast the ability automatically, but I can cast it automatically. Now to showcase how it works against 5 enemies. As you can see now, when it is surrounded by 5 enemies, or at the very least when it was surrounded by 5 enemies, it would be casting the spell automatically. But there is also one small problem, and that is that the Stormgate has an sort of kind of corpse mechanic, which I will be showing, which I will show you right now. And here we have it. Count enemies and count entities in the area that passes the validator. Currently I have both unities alive and unities enemy. Now I will through the combinator. Now I will check unities only enemy. Now it will only check if the unit is an enemy. And now let's see how it works now. And now I will go towards the enemies and I will not cast the ability manually once. Now as you can see, it is casting and now it is still casting the enemy despite everyone being dead. This is due to the corpse mechanics in the game. It still registrates it still checks the units, but they do not care if the corpse is alive or not. I think it only is the co-op ones that it uses the corpse mechanics, but it is something that will likely possibly be more widely used in the future in campaign and co-op, for instance. Now for the next spell, Recharge. This would be a concept where I have an energy-intensive unit that loses energy whenever it moves around or attacks other units. And when it has reached 0 energy, it will power down and need to recharge to full before it will become active again. Now let's get started. First thing first, buff movement terrain. This will be passively on the unit and drain energy so long as the unit is moving. I'll be setting the duration to -1 to make it last forever, and an icon to power leap, and modifiers to energy regen to -2, so that so long as the unit is moving, it will be losing 2 energy per second. And here you can see 2 validators, disable and remove. As the name suggests, this one, if the validator is not true, then the buff will be flat out removed from the unit. But disable, if this is not true, then it will simply all of the modifiers and everything and applied tags will temporarily be stopped functioning on the target until the validator is true. And now for the validator here. This will be a function called entity is moving, and this will be true so long as something is moving, in which this being the target. And I tried to with different stuff from caster and any unit, but only target work. I think this is because this is from the perspective of the buff here, that the target being the unit itself, meaning that not when the buff is moving, but when the target is when the target that the buff is affecting is moving. That is why only buff moves. This is why entity target only works with the buff here, and I believe for buff recharge as well. Next thing up, it is buff recharge, which is what the spell will be revolving around. First thing first, apply tags to status stunned. Now the status immobilize does not actually freeze the unit. I'm not sure why, but status stunned actually works in that it will stop the unit from moving. It cannot attack user abilities or anything else. And our buff visual in order to have it so long as the buff is active on the target, it will have a particle effects lasting on it, and a -1 to make this last forever, and modifiers to having energy regen to 10, meaning that it will, so long as the recharge is active, the unit will passively recharge 10 energy per second. And this time I will be using on remove, meaning that the buff will be removed whenever. This will be removed when this here is not true. And for the validator, seeing as this will be operating only when energy full is true, I will go into the content here. I will be a logic parameter with an less than and a core question from the function called entity energy percentage. There is an entity energy as well, but seeing as I only want this to be only be not true when the unit is full, I've set this to energy percentage and 100, meaning that this would only be true when the unit has less than 100 and 100% energy. If I had used entity energy, then if the unit had 30 energy or 50 energy, then I would have this to 30 or 50, or if it has maximum of 150, then it would have be set to 150. But with a percentage, I'll be setting this to 100, and it will go, and it will no longer be true when it is full. And again, seeing as this will be on a buff's perspective, I have to set this to entity target, not this self for anything else. Now for the apply buff, I will be setting this to. This will be for the recharge, which will be revolving around, and correct recharge here, and set this to the caster. So whenever this game effect apply buff is used, it will always target the caster, which is it itself. Next, modify vitals. I will be setting this to energy modify flat amount to -10 on the caster, which I will be setting this to the unit's weapon, so that whenever the unit attacks, it will lose 10 energy. And while I am here, I'll go quickly to the button, and I had already set it. This was one. And for the modify vitals here, I will do a quick detour to the unit's weapon. For the Kree's weapon, seeing as I will be using this on the Kree unit here. This unit's weapon has a set, meaning that I can easily incorporate the drain energy effect onto its weapon. And now for a validator for the validator, which would only be true when the unit has no energy left, which I will need a logic with an equal to an entity energy, and set entity energy is 0 and self. I will be using entity self here, seeing as this will be onto the staged ability, so that the caster checks itself for how much energy itself has. And now for the staged ability, I will be first go into Autocast, enabling Autocast, setting into initially on by default, and the no energy, which was the correct one, recharge. This means that the unit will only autocast the ability when it has when the caster has no energy left. And the game effect, cast game effect to apply buff, so that when the unit casts this ability, it will use recharge, which will stun the target and recover energy for its duration. And for what's the flag? Preempt here. And target actor to instant, so that I do not have to select the ability and then target the caster. And targeting type to unit, meaning that it will not be by some freak accident target the ground instead. Also, I will go into the Kree itself to apply the abilities quickly, and also quickly detour here. I will be giving the Kree unit 30 energy, and for the sake of demonstrating it, starting off with 20 energy. Seeing as the ability is dependent on energy. Also here, I will be adding one more buff, and if you apply usually you will need an apply buff to apply buffs onto the units, but units can spawn in with defaults by default as well, meaning that when the game starts and the unit is already standing there, or you create a fresh unit, then the unit will start with these buffs. Now let's test the ability. Okay, now we're in, and I did forget one thing about the rager. One thing I forgot to enable, but I'll be showcasing this in practice. Now I'm going to fight a couple of units over here, and you will see that the unit powers down briefly when it runs out of energy. Now you can see it will power once it runs out of energy. It will power down until it has full energy left. Now I'm just going to quickly kill off these units, and I'll demonstrate the problem now. Now let's see how the problem. You saw that it was working perfectly fine here, but watch when I'm using a move command now. The unit will not be casting its ability when it is moving, but when I stop, it will cast it. As you can see, it worked perfectly fine when I stopped, and when I specifically directly attacked this structure. Now let's see. Again, it will not be using its ability, but it will not be using its ability, even though it has 0 energy. And now, as I stop, it will be recharging. Also, this is a good time to showcase what preempt will do. Now as I go over here and I cast the ability, it will stop and continue to move, and continue to move afterwards. Now let me fix a couple of things. And now that we are back here, I forgot one thing in Autocast. Required scan level. By default, I believe that offensive means that this is only when it is looking for enemies, either when you are attack command moving, or you're standing still. When I use a direct attack command, then this is not on the offensive. I have applied a direct order, so this will not be true. So I will be setting this to none. This will mean that if the unit has another order or whatever, then regardless if it's moving, if it's attacking, whatever, it will be ignore that and cast the auto-cast ability anyway, if it can cast ability. And I'm not sure what passive or defensive mean, quite frankly, but hopefully at the very least you're aware now that Offensive means that when its unit is standing still or it is attack moving onto the ground, not on the target but on the ground. And none is what you will be using when you want to, for instance, be casting it when the unit is moving around or having a direct attack order on the unit. And this will be a good time to test the preempt here. Now you will be able to see what preempt will be looking like when what it will look like without preempt enabled. Now let's go and test it again. And now we are in, and first thing first, I will showcase what it looks like without preempt. Now I'm going to order the unit here and use the ability, and it will freeze. Now, as you can see, it refuses to continue onwards with its existing orders because it does not have preempt enabled. Now let's go to kill the units here. As you can see, it freezes up and recharges. Now I'm just going to quickly kill the units, and I will showcase when it is moving or attacking a structure. Now let's see. Now as the unit gets 0 energy, it will freeze up. And there you can see it. Now as it receives it, despite being in the move command, seeing as the offensive level required was the passive it will cast when it's moving, and tested on structure as well. As you can see, even if given a direct order to attack a structure, it will still cast its ability. Oh, and there is one small problem left with the spell. I can disable this. Now the autocast is no longer enabled. And what will happen? The unit no longer freezes because it does not autocast the ability. Now I swear that there was some unit that I saw previously that had an autocast that I could not disable the autocast with like I'm doing now, but I will showcase one way to work around this. Now give me a moment. Now I am with the Kree unit, and I'm going to go into the ability list. The ability list determines what spells the unit can cast, and the recharge is a spell with autocast that has autocast enabled by default. Now if I go to the command list, however, this right here, all of this is in theory redundant, because the unit will still cast the ability when it reaches 0 energy. So, what if I simply remove the ability here? Now, the button remains, but the ability does not. Now this will remain in the command card, the name and the description, but you will not be able to click it, because it is not tied to anything. I could tie this to an entirely separate ability. It would say that this is a recharge with its tooltip, but it will cast acid pool instead. So now the button in the command card's slot 3, it's not tied to anything. Now let's see how things works in the game. Now I'm back in the game, and I'm not sure why there's an unlocked icon here, but now let's test it out. And now as you can see, it will still recharge its ability because the ability is in its ability list. Now if I wanted to, I could remove this from the command card entirely, and it would still be casting the ability. I did try it previously, and there was no, and it would just be a blank icon then. But anyway, at the very least now, hopefully you understand a little bit better about autocast and command card and how that works for the unit. Now for the video's last Autocast ability, Retreating Teleport. This will be a spell from which the unit will be casting a teleportation spell when an enemy gets too close, and teleport away in a direction away from the enemy. And this will be a relatively small, simple spell. First thing first, I will be using teleport. This is the first time I've used it. And this will be targeting the point. And I'll go into effects and set this to caster. Quite frankly, I have no idea what effect origin actually does, but I've set this to caster and it does what I want, so I'm not gonna question this further. I have not used teleport enough to figure out as much. Now here will be two interesting parameters: find placement range and find placement angle. What this will do is that it will be auto-correcting the location if you cannot target to somewhere. For instance, if my Graven here targets on top of the structure, then it will not be able to stand here because it cannot move here. But if I had the appropriate find placement angle and range, then it would automatically be auto-correcting it to place the units in the closest vicinity where the unit will be able to stand. And I'll be setting this to a cone of 60, meaning that it will only be able to limit it to a cone of 60 degrees around the cone of 60 away from the caster to try and find a location, and an auto correction range of 3. So that at most it will be teleported to a range of 3 away from the cursor where I'm targeting, or else it will fail. And on impact effects, this I believe will be a graphical effect that will be played onto the teleporting unit when it hits the location where it is supposed to go. Like so, and I'll be setting this to a maximum range teleportation range of 6. So that, for instance, if I target this structure here and the area behind the structure here is further than the range of 6, then the unit will be trying to, in a 60-degree cone, at the maximum distance away from 3 from the cursor, it will try to find a range 6 or closer. And for the sake of demonstrating this, I will be testing this before I set the autocast and the placement correction on. I'll be setting quickly to abilities with the user interface icon to teleport, and this to specifically to teleport, which I will change later to the persistent, but this is for demonstration purposes. I'll be setting this to a cooldown of 1 second. And for now I will be setting this to location and a maximum range of 6. The Graven's name in the editor is Empath, and I'll be setting this to now let's give it a shot and test the ability. And I did a small silly mistake here as well. I forgot to determine which unit it was supposed to be teleported. The caster is the unit that will be teleported when you use the ability. And here we are. Now let's test it. As you can see, I'm targeting the middle of the structure, but it is auto-correcting to somewhere else. And let's try it on uphill, up the cliff here. As you can see, it will be targeting somewhere where the unit will actually be able to stand. and I dearly hope that in the future they will, or at the very least I will figure out a similar way I can use to refine my dash ability that I failed to create in order to create a similar spell in this manner. Also let's see here. Here, for instance, I am limited to a cone of 60 and a minimum range of 2, so I cannot cast it and it fizzles out. But if I go a little bit further away, then it should eventually be able to cast. As you can see. Now let's try to actually create the spell. Now onwards to continue with the spell. First thing first, I will broaden it to a 130 degree cone angle in front where the unit can cast the ability. And now for the persistent. I will be using the persistent here in order to to make the unit determine an location away from the caster to cast the spell. First thing first, I'm setting the initial to the teleportation effect, and the location will be centered around the caster. And now for the offset aspect of it. I will be using this to a range of 6. That's where it will be targeting away. The offset will be targeting away at a range of 6. And usually I would be using, where is it? It will start from the caster and go towards the target. However, as the persistence is currently set up, the perspective will go from the caster towards the target, meaning that if the unit comes close enough, then the caster will teleport a distance of 6 towards the target. So I will do something fancy here. I will be switching these two around, from caster and the starting point to the target, meaning that now the optics will be that it will be going from the target to the caster, and the center point of the persistent will be the caster, which will offset it to a range of 6 behind the caster away from the target, towards the caster away from the target. This will be true even if I do not face the target, for instance. If I am moving and come too close, then it will still be going in a range 6 offset away from the caster, away from the target. And now to assemble the spell. First thing first, let me just quickly, well actually, yes, first thing first, setting this to the persistent, so the ability will be targeting where to cast the spell, and Autocast, enabling Autocast, setting is to initially on, and the required scan to none. This will mean that even if the unit is moving or directly at direct order to attack a target, then it will still be auto-casting it away when the unit gets too close. And for instance, if the unit catches up to me and I'm walking away, then with the required scan level none, it will still be casting the spell, unlike if it was set to offensive. And now for a small conundrum. In order to cast the spell, I will have to facing the target. Now, if I was moving here or was running away, then the autocast will not be able to use the spell because I'm not facing the direction of the caster. I would have to turn around. So this is where the arc comes into play. This is how much the unit will have to face the target in order to cast the spell. If I, for instance, now had an arc of 180, then now in an arc of 180, I would be able to autocast the spell now without turning the unit. And now, for instance, I will not be able to cast the spell because I am in an 360-degree arc away from it. And now, with an arc of 360 degrees, I would be able to, in any direction, if an enemy unit gets too close, then the spell will be automatically be cast without the caster having to turn towards the target. And here is usually where I would have to use an validator and who knows what in order to make sure that only enemies would be eligible targets. But all I would have to do is to use the target filter here and untag self player and allies. Now the autocast will only be casting it on enemies and having a range of 3, meaning that the unit will only cast the spell if it gets within a range of 3. If it gets within a range of 3 of an enemy unit. And let's see, this was the correct way, yes. And it has a 1 second cooldown, and I'll set this here to 3, seeing as the persistent it effectively dictates that it will be trying to cast the spell at a range. It will be the effect itself, the teleport, will be trying to target a range of 6 away from the caster. So I'll just use it to a range of 3 here, and I will be where is it? And target sort, I will be setting this to closest, meaning that it will be trying to go away from the closest target. If things were like this and this unit here was closer, then the unit will still be going targeting the unit here without no target sort, seeing as it's without any target sort. It will go from bottom left and up to top right. And now for something as well. For the caster. Now I will remove the ability altogether away from the command list. And now let's try and test it out. And now we are in the game, and as you can see, there is no ability here displayed, but what happens when you get close enough? The unit will, with a 1 second cooldown, will be teleporting away from the target. And now what happens when you get too close to the wall here? Now when it is within a cone that it cannot cast a spell, then it will not be able to cast it away until I get within an appropriate position. And that's it for this video. I hope you got something out of it. Again, if you have something you want me to see made in the editor, feel free to comment so in the comment section. Stay intact and have a nice day.